Hello everyone and welcome back to Rewired. It has been a while and I've definitely missed doing this, and I promise I intend to stop starting my episodes off with that. I did want to take a little time today to talk about where the podcast is headed, so it won't be a traditional episode. I was just recently realizing that it's been almost 2 years since starting Rewired, so I think we needed a bit of a refresh and a rebrand. If you guys are unaware, I initially started this podcast as a part of my MYP personal project, which, if unfamiliar, is a project we do as part of the IB Middle Years program to explore a certain interest, hone research skills, integrate creativity into our lives, etc., etc. And I had full intention to keep it going after submitting my report, which is what ended up happening. And initially, the focus of the podcast was fairly straightforward. I had a newfound interest in psychology and wanted to explore something relevant to me and to those around me. And so what better topic than adolescence? And this eventually evolved into, adolescence through the lens of psych and the misconceptions that may be surrounding adolescent psychology and teen psychology, especially in media, considering things like emotional development, identity formation, the teenage brain, and basically all the internal experiences that might shape how young people understand themselves and the world around them. This focus that the podcast had zoomed into is definitely a core aspect of it, but personally over time it's become clear that psychology on its own only really explains just one part of the picture of adolescence, and my interests have most definitely evolved as I have grown. As I near 17 and start considering my future more frequently, I've reflected a lot and learned that I would like to study sociology in university. This is because it does combine my deep interest for the individual and human behavior, like we've been discussing on this podcast for a while now, though it also allows me to study the evolution and change of social systems and societies. All topics that consider social stratification and its influence on said human behavior. And upon this reflection, I started considering Rewired, of course, because this has always really been a learning and relaying journey for me, and I found that teenagers are in fact deeply impacted by social systems, so whether that be schools or peer groups or families or social media, online platforms, and these environments influence behavior almost just as strongly as individual psychology does, maybe even more so. And with this realization and my strengthening interests, of course, I've decided that moving forward, Rewired is going to broaden its focus slightly. I know. So alongside psychology, the podcast will start exploring more of the sociological side of adolescence, so the structures and the norms and the environments that shape what growing up in development looks and feels like, and how this might vary across societies. And so that means that the conversations here might become a little more analytical and sometimes a little more structural. So instead of focusing on how teenagers feel and think solely, we'll look at things like social hierarchies and how they appear so consistently in our environments, especially in places like school, how peer cultures develop, how digital environments might shape the concept of teenage identity, and this could apply both regionally, where I am right now, and globally, and essentially more generally, how institutions shape the experience of development. So basically the goal is still the same as it's always been, which is to understand adolescence more clearly, but the lens of the podcast and the analysis is getting a little bit wider. So that is the direction that the podcast will be moving in from here, which is quite exciting. There's a lot of growth and behind-the-scenes development happening, so stay tuned. If you've been listening for a while, I think it'll feel like a fairly natural continuation of the kinds of questions that we've already been asking, just approached from a slightly broader perspective. And yeah, with that said, I'd like to hear what you guys think. This has been nothing if not a collaborative process, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you think of this potential shift, what discussions you'd be interested in listening to, maybe any guests you'd like to see, any thoughts. And for anybody new or unaware, you can find me on Instagram at @officialrewired, no spaces, no capitals. I'm on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, one of which you're probably using right now, @Rewired, and of course you can email me at khadija.farrosh@gmail.com khadija.farrash@gmail.com. And finally, I wanted to give a huge thanks to those who have been listening, whether that be recently or since I started or a little in between. We will be releasing more consistently again, hopefully some new and fresh episodes for you all, so be sure to tell your friends. That's all for today's episode. See you very soon.